Okay, so get this right. What if, like, every undocumented worker in the U.S. just disappeared? Poof, gone. What do you think would happen?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we often don't really think about the costs, the hidden costs of them not being here anymore.
Right. Like, it's easy to think it wouldn't affect us, but it totally would.
Yeah, for sure. And those costs are, like, huge, actually. We're talking about undocumented immigrants contributing something like 3% of the U.S. GDP.
3%. That's a lot. I had no idea.
It really adds up. Like, over a decade, it's like $7 trillion. To put that into perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of France.
Wow. No kidding, that's a lot of money. Okay, so clearly they're contributing a lot, but how?
Well, think about the industries they're mostly in. Agriculture, construction, the hospitality industry, all these sectors, they rely heavily on undocumented workers.
Makes sense. I mean, those are jobs everyone needs, right? The food we eat, the houses we live in, even just going out to eat. It all kind of depends on those industries.
Exactly, and it's not just about the work itself, it's about the whole cycle, right? They're also buying stuff, contributing to the economy as consumers too. They rent apartments, buy groceries, spend money at local businesses.
So it's like a double whammy. They're both producing and consuming, which keeps things moving.
Yeah, precisely. And, here's something that might surprise you. Even though they're often excluded from certain benefits, they actually contribute a lot to taxes. Billions of dollars every year.
Wait, really? They're paying taxes even though they don't get the same benefits?
Absolutely. The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, they've estimated that undocumented immigrants pay about, $11.7 billion annually in state and local taxes.
$11.7 billion. That's insane. What kind of taxes are we talking about?
Well, property taxes are a big one. Those are super important for funding schools and all those essential local services. Then you've got sales taxes, which help with things like infrastructure development. And in some cases, they even pay income taxes too.
Wow, that's like really unfair when you think about it. They're paying into a system, but not really getting to fully benefit from it. But it also really shows how connected they are to our whole economic system, right?
It really does, and we haven't even talked about Social Security yet. Even though they don't have full access to the benefits, it's estimated they pay around $12 billion each year into it through payroll taxes.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So they're putting billions into a system they might never even be able to use. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to that thought experiment for a second. If, hypothetically, every undocumented worker just vanished overnight, what would that look like for, like, everyday Americans? What would be the real immediate effects?
Well, imagine going to the grocery store and suddenly half the produce section is empty.
Oh, no.
Yeah, those fresh fruits and vegetables we usually take for granted, suddenly they're either hard to find or way more expensive.
That would be awful.
Yeah.
Now, what about things like, construction? Would that be affected?
For sure. Construction projects would probably slow down a ton, maybe even stop completely. Just picture all those half-finished buildings all over the place. And think about restaurants, too. A lot of them might have to close down because they can't find enough people to cook or serve.
Well, that sounds pretty bleak, honestly. And, it's interesting because I feel like we're already seeing this kind of thing happening a little bit, especially in areas like agriculture. They're struggling to find workers.
Yeah, you're right. Agriculture is one of those areas that really depends on undocumented workers. Some estimates say they make up like 50 to 70% of the agricultural workforce.
Whoa, that's a lot. So if they weren't there, it would totally mess up the whole food supply chain.
Exactly. We could end up with food shortages and prices going way up. It wouldn't just be about not finding your favorite type of avocado anymore. It would be a real issue of food security.
Totally. And we were talking about construction earlier. That would be a huge problem too. We'd have all these delays in building houses, fixing roads. Pretty much everything would slow down.
Yeah, you've got it. And remember, a lot of those jobs are ones that many Americans aren't really willing to do, even if the pay went up.
That's a good point. So we're basically talking about massive disruptions to our lives in all sorts of ways. It's easy to forget about these workers, but they're keeping so much of our society running smoothly.
That's right. And we haven't even touched upon the cost of actually deporting millions of people. That would be unbelievably expensive.
It sounds like trying to get rid of undocumented workers would backfire in a big way,
Correct.
creating all these problems that would affect everyone.
Yeah, there could be a ton of unintended consequences. Like, some people argue that removing undocumented workers would lead to higher wages for American workers, but the research on that is actually pretty mixed.
Really? So even if all those jobs were open, there's no guarantee Americans would fill them, and even if they did, they might not even make that much more money.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not that simple. You have to think about the types of jobs we're talking about, right? A lot of them are really tough physical work, and often they're in places that a lot of Americans aren't really looking to move to.
Yeah, like rural areas, right?
Exactly. Plus, some of these jobs need specific skills, you know? It's not just about showing up. So even if you offered more money, there's no guarantee Americans would be lining up to take them.
So what happens then? If the jobs are there, but nobody wants to do them?
Well, then the businesses have a problem, don't they? They have to figure something out. They might try to, automate those jobs, use machines instead of people. But that's expensive, and it could even lead to other people losing their jobs, the ones who used to work on those machines, for example.
Right, so it's not a simple solution. And what other options do they have?
Well, they could try outsourcing the jobs, sending them overseas. But that's not great for American workers either, is it? And sometimes, honestly, the businesses might just have to shut down.
Oh, wow, so it's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
Instead of helping American workers, it could end up hurting them even more.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got the cost of actually deporting people, which is crazy expensive. The Department of Homeland Security, they say it costs about $10,000 to deport just one person.
$10,000 per person. That's a lot of money.
It is. And when you multiply that by millions of people, you're talking about billions, maybe even hundreds of billions of dollars. Just gone. Poof. All that taxpayer money, it's going into detention centers, legal stuff, transportation. It's a huge logistical mess.
Wow, it's mind-blowing when you think about it like that. And I get that's not even considering what happens to the communities these people are leaving behind.
Right. You're losing taxpayers, businesses are closing, there's more pressure on social services. It's like this ripple effect, this shockwave that goes through the whole country.
So it's not just an economic issue, it's a social issue too.
Absolutely. And beyond that, there are these hidden costs that are hard to measure but are super important. Like, think about the fear, the lack of trust, the divisions that happen when a whole group of people is forced to live in the shadows.
Yeah, if people are afraid to, go to the doctor or report a crime because they might get deported, that hurts everyone, right?
Exactly. And we can't forget about the families, the kids who are U.S. citizens but could be separated from their parents. That trauma, the hardship, it has consequences that last for years.
So really, this whole idea of eliminating undocumented workers, it's not just about economics, it's about who we are as a society, right? How we treat people, what we value.
You got it. It all comes back to that thought experiment we started with. It seems simple at first, but the more you dig into it, the more you see how complicated it is. Removing all those workers would have consequences we probably can't even imagine.
Yeah, they're such a vital part of our economy and our communities. We've talked about how much they contribute through their work, their spending, even their taxes. It's clear they're not just workers, they're part of the fabric of our society.
Exactly. And even though there's so much debate about immigration, we can't ignore the economic reality. The cost of eliminating undocumented workers is way bigger than most people think, and the consequences, they would affect all of us.
It's wild, right? We started with this thought experiment, but now it feels like we've uncovered this huge, complex issue. It's not just about should they stay or should they go, it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the political talk about immigration misses the economic realities on the ground.
Totally, the numbers we talked about, the trillions in lost GDP, the disruptions to all those important industries, it would affect everything.
And don't forget about the billions we'd spend on deportations, money that could go towards other things like, education or healthcare.
It just makes you think, right? Are these policies actually worth it? You try to fix one problem, but create a bunch of others.
Right. It shows how complicated the whole thing is. And hopefully this deep dive has, made people think a little differently about this issue.
Definitely. So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway is pretty simple, really. Getting rid of undocumented workers, it's not as easy as it sounds. And it would cost a lot more than most people realize.
It's not just some abstract economic theory. It would actually affect everyone's lives in very real ways.
Exactly. At the end of the day, it's about people. Real people with real jobs. It's about families and communities. And the consequences, they would touch all of us.
For sure. And it's important to remember that, to see beyond the political arguments and really think about what's at stake here.
Totally. We need to have a more honest, more informed conversation about immigration, one that takes all these factors into account.
So, to our listeners, after hearing all this, what questions are you left with? What do you think about the economic impact of immigration? Is there more to this story than you thought? We'd love to hear from you, so share your thoughts with us on social media.
And remember, even when we're dealing with these big, complex issues, it's important to stay curious, to keep asking questions, to think critically.
Well said. Stay curious, everyone, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.